Hello, hello. Welcome to a beautiful Friday. Happy New Year, sir. How's it going? We have Emo Cowboy, a recurring guest and friend of the show here, who I think you did pretty well in some a couple tournaments, right? The Best Ball Sicko, Horn Dog, and all around good guy. So, what's up, bro? How you been?
Not too bad, man. Happy New Year. Good to see you. Yeah, we did okay. You when you don't make a top five, let alone a top three finish, you're just hungry for more going back. But feeling good overall. Feel like the process was, net positive. Which in these streets, that's all you can hope for.
Process over results. I completely agree. Yeah, I didn't have any sweats or anything. I, I I did 51 random number BBMs, and I think a lot of my best teams had Mark Andrews and like Tyreek, Lamar, like Ravens, Miami stacks, and so they were doing really good until around week 14 or like 13, 12, something like that, and then kind of fizzled out there at the end. But had a few make it to the. I think I had 10 or 12 make it to the first round, but none to the semis. So the only thing that was fun for me was my friend that I had on Wednesday. He had one that made to the finals, ended up 15th overall, which is pretty wild. So that was, I wasn't paying attention to anything else. I was just paying attention to that team because it was pretty intense. So
Yeah, no, that was sick. Having a top 15 sweats sick. It really sucks when you look at how brutal the fucking payout structure is out of the top five. Uh,
yeah.
but yeah, no, that's sick. Yeah, for me, for BBM specifically, and I remember talking to people about this. And we talked about this a couple times, but especially early on in the drafting process that I was going into this last drafting season very mindful about tournament selection. And so that's exactly what I did. So I got to say, as far as resolution, probably double down on contest selection.
Okay.
Um, so for like BBM, I only entered 30. A good chunk of those were cardio club, just because, a reason to get off my ass and do shit, just because I work at home, and I'm spending all the time like on either my phone or my computer. At least get moving. And hilariously, I know small sample size, but 30 BBMs, all of my best BBMs were underdog cardio clubs.
There you go. The
With
process.
Yeah, with the I had seven with an eighth close advancing into the playoffs, and then I went in with just one in the semis, which not bad. And then that one finished in third in its pod, unfortunately, just because the running back room of Connor, Kyron, Chuba, and gang did fine. None of them really had big weeks. Like that Kyron Thursday night game was like that in my pod. I was like, if Kyron has a 30 plus point game, that's going to be huge for me. He doesn't. CMC goes off for like 27, and so CMC Ayuk teams nudge me out. Um, and then, of course, the following week, my running back room is the nuts with Kyron Connor, Gus,
I
Chuba, all
saw that. Yeah.
Jalen Warren. So of course, the very next week, a guy that had 15% Kyron and BBM, and that team was from a June uh,
Really.
cardio club. Yeah, I was on Kyron for a good majority of the season, and that's the only take. Nah, I kid. But that was probably my proudest of just being like, so that ended up that team. It it sucked that it didn't make it through, but it for me it was like instead of getting gutted that my last BBM team would have scored third overall in the finals, I felt rejuvenated that the process was good. Like I felt like I had my best drafting season. I was most mindful of tournaments, and at least I can look at that team and go, its process was fucking rock solid. CD, Amon-Ra, Laporta, Jordan Love, zero RB team that leveraged no CMC, had a low owned Kyron, just things like that. It was nice to see that process feel good. And so, yeah, I had 3 teams in the finals on Underdog. One of them was the Golden, so that was bittersweet. It was a single entry $10 tournament, but it was winner take all. So it was first or nothing the entire time. I went in the finals with Danny Dimes and Russ Wilson, so I knew I was dead
Oof.
because I had no quarterback points. Despite sneaking a Kyron team in June into that as well, because it filled up pretty fast. But it was fun to see that pod, and then I had a puppy 2 and a puppy 4. And my best sweat was the puppy 2. I finished 66th, went into Sunday Night Football 50th with Justin Jefferson being able to take over. He just needed to outscore maybe like, I don't know, 9 points from a rando wide receiver room. So Jerron Hall starting instead of Nick Mullins for the first half was fucking excruciating.
That's real rough, yeah.
A 17-point game from Jefferson probably gets me like a top 10 finish. But I went over, tried out some drafters this year because shout out Eagles and Spags. Eagles specifically was like, didn't have a sweat per se, but he's like, as an ROI chaser, I tripled up my money last year on drafters. And I was like, you know what? My whole thing was Underdog. A lot of these tournaments are first or nothing, really and truly, real top heavy, and shit can break bad. So let's go play some stuff to like ROI chase. And so yeah, 420 very purposeful dollars into drafters turned into about 2K with a 98th and 200th overall finish in the $20 300K to first tournament where Updog got second.
Okay.
So anyway, yeah. So like overall, 15.5% ROI on the year, real close to a little bit more, but had a good time. And the hilarious thing is I had a pretty decent year with I went and targeted like those higher and mid stakes leagues and absolutely dusted every single one of them. I just ran into the worst fucking luck. I didn't advance any of them. Our Roddy team with Mathology didn't make it through, and that sucked because that had a Love Jordan Love outscoring Jalen Hurts team. But yeah, just injuries ruined all of my mid to high stakes. I think my best chance was like a Pitbull that had 0 RB room with Connor and Kyron again, but it didn't advance by like a 1.5 in the regular season. Just injuries were a bitch in those. So I will look forward to doing that again next year and hope that just the injury variance falls my way. Because a couple of those teams were like Dimes, AR, and Field stacks, and all those guys missed either a huge chunk of the season or the whole season, basically. So, yeah, I'm excited to run it back. But overall, it was a fine year. But I've spent nights just going to bed and thinking, like even last night, I'm just like, how do I do this better? How do I think about this better? And that's been eating me alive. So that's what we're here to talk about today, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely agree with you on wanting to do more high stakes. I just feel like try to even it out instead, not just because I think the only high stakes team I did was with you guys. So just trying to spread out the contest selection. I didn't do any drafters. And I, like you said, like is drafters is PPR as well, right?
Yeah, drafters is PPR, and they had, I want to say the big $20 tournament had like, maybe it was 82% filled. So it was definitely, part of it was definitely chasing promos and overlay as well, because they were doing like every 4th draft, you would get like a free entry or something like that. And then you had first time depositing bonus and overlay. So all in all, I'm glad I was very purposeful and like, hey, go chase some really good action that ended up padding my season so I could feel like I had a good season instead of getting dusted by variance and feeling like a waste of time. So that will be my focus going into 2024 as well, is just doubling down on chase the high variance stuff, but go chase some shit to pad as a safety net. So that way, non-ironically, reduce your variance where you can. I look at this as expendable income, but it's not bad to basically make it back with a little bit extra when you put in that much fucking time and energy into it. You'd like to not go, well, I'm glad I paid a little bit of money to burn, God, what, 40 plus hours a week on this shit, for the true grinders. Cause I think I did like 550 drafts overall this season, 80% fast, 20% slowish. I'll probably do similar volume next year and just keep edging a little bit more into drafts with softer advancement structures or potentially softer rooms where my edge can be pushed. And my edge specifically is what my resolution. I was thinking about this last night and I was like, okay, I gotta do better in a couple of spots specifically. So if you want to talk I don't know what you want to talk first, resolutions or lessons learned, or maybe
No, we can do resolutions first. That's fine if that's first thing on your brain. Yeah,
it is, because I looking back, the edges I like to push are some player takes, but player takes that are mostly fueled by taking coaching staffs for who they are and what they've shown, and taking players for what they've shown, not for what we hype them up to be. And then also the big one I think I can push better than anybody, and I've been very vocal about the last few months, is like the medical side of things. I follow all of the really good non-asshole-ish fantasy doctors on Twitter. I'm married to a PT. And so every year I try to be less injury optimistic without any historical data to back it. And I look back on my portfolio and I go, I ignored that straight up for guys like Treylon and Rashad Bateman. That they had very questionable medical profiles, and the sharp guys were like, this is not a great sign. This is very questionable. And instead of that being a reason for me to go, well, regardless of what I'd like to think, if they were fully healthy and being fed the ball, I have to look at this as it's a questionable medical place. And so I was inconsistent with how I applied medical skepticism. I faded Tony for a questionable medical history and a very questionable profile at a price. I came on here and said, and on Twitter, I'm not drafting Tony in the top 100. I don't give a shit. It's a bad bet, and I'd rather just. And this year was really that. It was just, if you can avoid landmines, and some of them you're just not going to know. Like Mike Williams, sorry. Aaron Rodgers.
Some of it's random.
Aaron Rodgers is he's a 40-year-old. He came into camp looking skinny with a bad offensive line. That doesn't take a genius to go. And that was one where I was like, I'm going to be a lot lighter on the Jets pieces outside of the young youth guys. And even with Garrett Wilson, I came on here and was like, his price is expensive, and I don't know that you want, yada. And you got the worst run out for that. And it didn't end up mattering for our boy Brees, but his 3rd to 6th round price throughout the summer, it made it a lot easier to tolerate. So 2024 resolution is be more fucking consistent with how I apply these criteria and edges. I think one of the best ways we can play is getting some of the noise biases that fuck us up. We talk about you draft 100 teams and you get into a rhythm, and that rhythm can be really fucking detrimental to exploiting and Pat was kind of talking about this on a couple of his lessons learned wrapped up podcasts, where it's so hard for us to think about week 17 in the way that it truly is, which is at the end of a long fucking season. There's so much we're not going to know. There's so much that's going to break its way. But how do we optimize for this specific game, especially on Underdog, where that's where all the fucking money is. And not only all the money is at the top fucking 10% finish, if that. So it's how do I think about it in that way? And I realize if I applied these things consistently, I would at least help myself avoid roadblocks to do that. So, like, how likely is it that guys like Rashad Bateman and Treylon Burks, who are starting camp injured on staffs that are very so on the players, and Tennessee's in like in a win now mode, and they're obviously looking for a receiver, and then they end up signing Nuke before the drafting season's over, and it's like, well, they're gonna want to feed him. They just got him. That's probably not the best sign for his health. We've seen them lean on guys like Chris Moore and company late in the season, and those guys are dust balls, and we don't expect this team to be really good. And how much are they going to really push the guy that's not healthy? So it's like all these things where it's like, and you know, the Sam Howell thing was a perfect example. It was like he could be really, really good for most of the season, and he was. But then how live is he to stick on at the end? So it's like, okay, week 17 comes along, the dominoes of guys get less and less healthy, guys get banged up. I mean, we see it all the fucking time. So exactly, why would I want to start off with a guy in the hole? And logic tells me there's got to be a better bet somewhere else. And that's really what we're looking for. We're looking for better bets. And so to tie into that, what I've been thinking a lot about is full fading guys. And I did that successfully with Tony and Sky until I capitulated late in the season, and fucking hell, I got aggravated by that.
He fell a little bit, so then
right, but like at cost, it was like guys who don't, because like hits matter way more than misses, and we saw that this year. Like you could have a very imperfect draft as long as you hit on a few pieces that could be huge, but we can increase our odds of getting more of those hits by fading small wins, because at the end of the day, those small wins don't fucking matter compared to the big hits. And in the way of all the money's at the top, all the money's at the end. So I'm gonna try to like think through, how do I push this? And one of the ways I can get unique in just roster builds and get unique in combinations is having my roster top to bottom made up of different players and different archetypes. And so, you know, like Justin Jefferson was on the winning roster. Not Justin, Van Jefferson was on a couple different winning rosters across different portfolios. But the less deep your roster is, the more important it is you have more shots at guys that fucking matter. And you get that whenever you're not wasting any roster space on likely duds, you know. We talk about dead roster spots, and there's not a whole lot you can do 17 weeks fast forward. But guys like Van Jefferson are not likely to get big roles or fed in meaningful games down the stretch, or dominate shitty competition in a way that matters. So why clog your roster with those guys? And I think the criteria for those guys, I need to expand a bit on a personal level, because we can look at macro team level things to help us kind of set nets of like, this just feels like roster cloggers. And in season long, you know, waiver shit, you can drop those guys, but you're stuck with them. And Matt and Pat talked about this, and I found myself looking, like, analyzing my last 2 round picks a lot on Underdog, specifically because it's 18 rounds. So there's a bigger premium on who you're swinging for in those late rounds. And by taking fucking dust balls, perfect example, I didn't like Dalton Kincaid at cost compared to guys like Musgrave and Laporta and McBride. And so I was really heavy on those guys. But I convinced myself that if Kincaid's a bad bet, Knox has got to be a pretty good bet, right? From a projectable volume standpoint, blah, blah, blah,
Sure.
blah, blah. Well, probably in that case, it's not running back, where if one guy doesn't get there, it probably benefits the other guy. And by compounding that, you leverage that. In that case, we saw exactly what it was. When both are healthy, both are cannibalizing each other, and neither is useful. And in half point, non-tight end premium, why am I clogging my roster with a dud of Dawson Knox that only gets there if Kincaid gets hurt? And then even then, his projectable volume goes up like what, 3 points max?
Yeah, not too much.
It's not winning me anything. Why would I take him versus New Orleans, Juwan Johnson? pretty much a dud all season. And this came to mind because it's like they had like a billion tight ends with Jimmy Graham and Taysom Hill being like the Army Swiss knife. But what happens if a offense that went through a stretch in 2022 that fed him doing the Michael Thomas role? And if I'm fading Michael Thomas for reasons I should have been fading guys like Rashad Bateman and Treylon Burks for, which is very questionable injury history.
100%.
Almost every Twitter doctor is very dubious on how likely it is at his age with his injury profile. He can be 90% of who he was. Plus, now with target competition in a lot of different forms, what if at the end of the season, Michael Thomas isn't making it through? Like, it's unlikely to. Guys like Taysom, who play every fucking position under the sun, are kind of banged up, and they just need a win. And Carr goes back to who he is, which is feed the tight end, let it happen. Like, thinking through those thought processes of both in each draft, what are the bets I'm making, and how does that domino effect in a way I can compound it on this roster, but then in a portfolio perspective, is something I personally need to get better at. And I'm moving so fucking much that my camera's having trouble focusing on me, and that's classic. There we go. So those are some of my resolutions: is getting better at thinking through how the dominoes fall and how they can impact each other, because I want to get the biggest payoff for being right. Not just what do you get when you're right? How do I compound that in the biggest way? And hearing smart people talk through it and thinking through it in my own way, there are ways I can do that much, much better throughout my portfolio and in each draft. And I feel like it's a multifaceted step where I need to apply my criteria. I need to, and it's something I did better this past year. Like, I'm using Pat's leg up ranks. They were fucking awesome, especially for how often I was drafting and how often market things were changing. But I would go in and, I'm bumping OBJ way down. I'm bumping Kadarius Toney way down. I'm never going to get these guys. It relative to cost. And guys like Van Jefferson, I'm bumping all the way down. I'm not going to have any of them. But I need to do that with more players that also don't have a likely, like, what is their top 1% outcome, and how likely is that outcome, especially relative to who I'm fading, who I'm heavy on, and late season, what is the likelihood that if things go really well or things go really bad, how's that going to pan out? And you're not going to be able to know it all. We're not going to know how defenses handle. And this is a great example. I was targeting Atlanta and Chicago really heavily because I thought they're probably both going to be underperforming. And if anything, the defenses are probably going to be young and bad and injured, and the offenses have really dynamic pieces. Those guys can go off in the late season. And that was somewhat true, but guess what happened? Eberflus is a defensive guy. Midway through the season, his defense sucks, and we're all like, this could be the game. And then he makes a coaching change, scheme changes, trades for Montez Sweat, and now they've got like a top 5 unit that stifled a lot of guys. And so from a macro level, I think instead of getting deep in the weeds on totals and strong defenses versus weak defenses, I need to be more consistent on how are these coaching staffs likely to approach games where they have to win, where they don't have to win. And another good example, something I was inconsistent with. I was very aware of how good Dallas's defensive pieces are. And I was like, so as much as I liked guys like Amon-Ra, Gibbs, Monty at cost or in their upper echelon, I was really worried that we have seen Jared Goff play really fucking bad against defenses that can pressure really, really well. And we talked about this. I was like, this is a defense that, if healthy, like versus, like both these lines can be really strong, but we've seen Dallas just obliterate lines, especially against quarterbacks that panic and don't do well under pressure. And when you watch that game, week 17, Goff is like missing on out routes because he's just pushing the ball out so he doesn't get whacked. Micah Parsons is crushing the line. No one can block him. And what's the likelihood the line's going to be like full strength with a bunch of older guys, which the Detroit line is on the left half, with Decker and shit. And that's exactly what was happening. It was getting pummeled. And so guys like Amon Ra were getting fed. Laporta had a chance to get fed, but Goff was stifling the like upside of that offense. And only one running back got there, and that was Monty with 12 and a half points because of a touchdown. And so those things were in my head when I was drafting about like, I don't want to take a ton of Goff because I think he can have a good season, but I think in the week that it matters, I think he's going to be easily replaced.
Sure.
So that should have gotten me higher on the Cowboys than I was because defensively, Detroit's got some really solid pieces, but if they're going to stifle Goff, there's a chance they get a lot of chances on goal. And then also, I bought into like, well, they brought in a bunch of defensive secondary guys into Detroit. They can really turn this around. But then what if they don't? And then what if the Cowboys have to lean on what works, which is a running back coming off of Fila, who I was not skeptical enough about the injury returning to form. I was
absolutely same
too optimistic that he was going to be him, blah, blah, blah. And what happens, it's Dak, CD, and Cooks just airing it out, which I had on some teams, but not on enough teams. And so it's like and the Lions can be big parts that get you there, but it's like you might want a skinny stack on a team. So like, for instance, a Goff plus Amon Ra was not killing you. Goff, Amon Ra, and Gibbs and Laporta probably did because you could have stacked up bigger scores. And so the other thing that I'm going to be looking to do is more mindful stacks. Like there are teams that probably have a better chance to support multiple stacks, especially at cost, and stacks that are probably better like mini correlations or skinny stacks. Because that also gives you the chance to get through the gauntlet because it's not just a 1 week thing. It's not just a 1 season thing. You've got multiple weeks in the playoffs. And that's something I was not as mindful of when I'm building my drafts. Not enough times could I see like, correlation was getting me on the guys in a good way, but I think it could be done in a more mindful way. And especially taking more younger guys. We talk about it all the time, but we're very selective in who's worth taking. And when you look at the season, if you just took rookie receivers, like all else fails, you're like, fuck it. I'm just going to throw instead of throwing darts on all the RB2s that don't work or get you there, the Trayvon Williamses, the Chase Browns, the guys that were fine, Ty Chandlers, guys that were fine in spots, but overall didn't elevate you to the way you'd want to. Almost every rookie receiver except for Mingo was and could have been that when you look at it, and QJ. So I need to be more mindful of doing that, and I need to be more consistent with how I'm approaching that. And when all else fails, those are the guys likely to get there late. Like give the rookie more chance. The rookies come on, the vets rest, the vets get injured, the vets don't get there, whatever. And they're picking up the playbook, blah, 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 blah. And also they've got a shit ton of juice because they're young and because we don't know what their true upside is.
And their role increases over the season.
Yeah, exactly. So that's my long ass soliloquy on what I've been thinking through and what I've been working towards. And I'm probably going to have to write it down and like make a visual thing to remind myself because I'll have week 17 memorized, but I probably need like a reminder on my other monitor of here's what we do, here's what we think through. And because at the end of the day, we're trying to zoom out to win all the money at this point, and how are we going to drive it there? And it's easy to forget that when you go into the draft with all these like
don't get so comfortable like in the draft. Yeah, like I think that's a really good point of just having some
cruising instead of fighting the stream. Like if it feels like an easy draft, you're probably fucking up by not thinking through how else you can attack it. And is kind of what I'm thinking. I think every draft should feel earned because that means you're thinking through all the things.
You're challenging yourself and your biases and stuff like that. Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's they'll definitely have to talk with you and lean into the injury stuff because I feel like I'm not as tapped into that. So I feel like that's a big thing too. Is just different people have different edges. So whatever, like if you have a community of people who kind of like whatever, each person is probably the best at one thing, or they have a little bit of an edge. I know like Mathology, who's going to come on today, like he's a big DFS guy, so I think he has like an interesting perspective on a lot of things. That is different than me and you and whatever. There's a lot of people who are smart and know what they're doing, but it's just a little bit different. So trying to get those edges from different people and learn from different people is a huge thing. So
Especially like with like the health info, a lot of it's free and public, especially with like Jeff Mueller. But like Edwin Porris's guide, he had like a promo and it was like $15. And at that point, and it comes out like mid-season, but at that point, that should be something where I adjust more. When I scroll through his guide and I see guys I like with yellow and red, I need to just go bump it down. Go bump them down in my ranking.
He's the expert, right?
It's like I don't care what I think. Data and science is telling me this, and guess what? What happens if that's right? Well, if I'm one of the few people that's truly consistently applying this across everybody in the draft room, and everybody's doing thousands of drafts, but there are just these 12 to 14 guys that I'm just going to be underweight or have none of, well, that's exponentially increasing my likelihood to lap the field where it matters, because they likely are, if that comes to fruition, they likely are have more dead spots keeping them from, and that's also a way to like get more teams into the playoff rounds.
Well, you're pushing your chips in on your edge, right? Like that's what it is. Yeah. It's just leaning into it. So
yeah. So that's where I've been kicking myself the most is, and especially because I talk about this in like a cheeky way. Casey. I talk about this in a cheeky, combative way a little bit during draft season because the echo chamber thing, right? Like we listen to a lot of smart people. When Sean drops his list, when Pete drops his, like, I've done 75 drafts and here's what I'm saying. When Pat drops his shit, like they have a lot of big hits. They have a lot of big swings. But it occurs to me that if we're all following, and I say all, we're like what? Maybe generously
like 200.
We're maybe generously 15% of the field, maybe, right? Because that data was done, when Scott Barrett is week 17, and we know that like 10% of the field, 12% of the field in BBM was doing, week 17 and stacking, and like half of that was week 17. So like we know that's an edge that's still alive and we can push it. But if like 20-ish% of the field is using, and we talk about it with like ETR stuff, like if you're playing DFS and you're like, oh, ETR just dropped their ranks. Okay, so if you're thinking through like ownership from that perspective, that's one thing I was thinking through this season was like, if Sean's going to drop a 0 RB list and all the ship chasers are going to be like, okay, we got to get B-Rob, we got to get, you know what I'm saying? Like, whether or not that's right, my edge may be in if the sharpest drafters are following the sharpest people's shit and they're going to take a lot. And, like Sean has big hits, but he also has big misses. Like the Tyquan Thornton thing this season, like complete dead. And when you thought through, what if our optimism on New England is wrong? Well, that means this team could be really bad. And if they've already benched their starting quarterback before, and we already hear whispers that like something called Pop Douglas in the summer is being interesting, and they gave Juju Smith-Schuster $40 million. When you think through like what happens if this team just falls apart, they're probably not going to play the guy that's been in the doghouse because unlike Shanny, Bill doesn't really let guys out of the doghouse. Like they have to play really, really well. Ramondre has been like one of the few instances where it's like he got put in the doghouse and he fucking balled out and he earned the right to fuck up and keep going. Tyquan did not earn that. We heard none of that over the summer. We didn't see any of that his rookie year. And if things go to shit, well, Bill's probably the type of guy that he's not going to give the young up and comer whatever. He's going to put the guys in he trusts to try to grind out a win. and thinking through those things. So it's like, so in that instance, if Sean's really heavy on those guys, or if Pat's really heavy on those guys, who are some players I can potentially be lower on and leverage other guys for that, yada yada. It's an ownership thing, because when you show up to the finals, you're probably going to be in the finals with a lot of sharp fucking dudes. Just that's how it goes. That's how we
You're
draft.
right.
That's
It's
also how
super.
variance goes. And teams that are correlated and stacked are probably the ones going to the finals, and to be in the top echelon. And if it's fucking flat payouts, how do I lap those guys without being lucky? Well, it's probably by having different player combos, and that's not my first 3 round picks, like changing them up. You can, but we see that like the power is in like the back half of the draft. And so that's something I'm going to be more mindful of as well, is like, how do I leverage what I know the sharp field is doing and potentially being different,
Pivoting off of that, yeah.
in smart ways, because at the end of the day, you didn't really need anybody. Like Brees had a huge game, Amari had a huge game the previous week, whatever. Pickens had a big game, but at the end of the day, like, if you have players that other people don't have, or don't have the combinations of, and the regular season winner in BBM was like a really, really awesome way to do that, because the way he ended his draft was like, the guys that were going undrafted, I think like at the time he drafted it was like Gus, Kyron, and Ford. All those guys were going around 17 or 18. He took all 3 of those guys. And so it was like, you're fucking leveraging yourself, because how many teams have all 3 of those guys on a roster that's also built really well, So it's when I'm thinking through levers, I'm thinking of ways that it could be applied in a stronger, more mindful way, and maybe in a way that we're not doing, but especially when it comes to like, I don't know, like player selection stuff. So, yeah, it was one thing that was an interesting way to attack, but I haven't quite gotten on how to do it, besides just kind of fading some of the optimism on it. But
Yeah. No, I think like I want to talk to some smart people and kind of like you said, like write some stuff down and really like actually like think about it and like dig through it like early on, so that when we do get drafting, we can kind of work our way through it, and we're not doing it. We're obviously going to be doing it during the season when we're drafting, but also just like get ahead of the curve on that and just think about like, okay, how is the market going to react to stuff? Like you said, like how are the smart people, like what are they thinking and how do I pivot off of that? Whatever, just be prepared. Obviously take some time off. Like we're all sickos. So I'm not drafting. I just did a dynasty startup a couple of days ago because I'm crazy, but
I am so excited to send my commissioner my letter of resignation from the league. It's like my last managed league, but I forgot to set my lineup for like the last 2 weeks of the season, because I was going like full tank mode. And when I forgot 2 weeks in a row to set that stupid fucking lineup in the toilet bowl, because our toilet bowl winner gets like an extra pick, I was like, okay, I gotta quit this. It's been 4 years. This sucks. I don't even remember to fucking set the lineup anymore. They need somebody in here that's gonna grind their cock to a nub, because I'm not trying to
your
sit here and
cock up
play
on
market dynamics with
BestBall, then you're
players.
fine. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I'm spending all this time. Like, we're not spending Chad, 200 hours a week levels of drafting, but we're spending a lot of fucking time for like 4 or 5, 6 months, some of us drafting. So it's like, how much do I want to really spend doing that then during the real season in even more of a grindy way? It's like, I don't. So I need to eject.
I wanted to talk about one of my resolutions is you said you think your edge is injuries. I think my edge is like I am a dynasty virgin, so I already know like a lot about the incoming rookies. And I'm really digging deep into all of that. So I think I want to try, because I think when the contest opens, like right after the NFL draft, like a lot of people are still, I think people were trying to target, obviously they were trying to target rookies, but like if I'm really in the weeds and like I know, whatever, I know so much about them that I think the first like week or so, I can really dig into that and just take advantage. Cause some of my best teams were like my first teams drafted. last year. So I think I really want to lean into that. And then obviously I'm going to be drafting on stream like during the whole summer, but like outside of drafting on stream, kind of leaving a lot of my drafts for August because
You heard it here first, folks. He's going to have some super secret off-stream drafts where he drafts the real guys he wants. So his stream drafts are red herrings.
well, yeah, because I think like we have so much more information in August, like just of who the RB2s are, whatever, just the roles are more solidified.
Yeah.
Because I really think those are the two periods where like we either have the most information in terms of roles in August, and then just where I think I can realize my edge in terms of rookies and just getting that sweet ADP value and closing line value. I think that's where I really want to lean to. Yeah, barbell approach. I know people have talked about it before. I think it's even more.
I think less than barbell. I think both of what we're talking about is like identifying specific players or situations to hammer heavier as a percentage of the portfolio. Like Rifler mentioned, and Pat mentioned, was like when Kyron was clearly the number 2. Like it's just the whether or not your volume changes, it's like your concentration of exposure is, from a portfolio perspective, is more dialed in and focused. And so for me, I got distracted with, I saved a lot of bullets late in like my BBMs to take advantage of late info, but I got really wrapped up in like how late can I push cup and all this other shit, and forgot to like, hey, take advantage of these guys that are, the RB2s and the tight
it's really
end.
later on where
they haven't risen a whole lot. Go ahead and, hey, that like round 12 like wasteland where you go, I hate this fucking spot. Start taking the guys that fucking matter and comboing them together. Because for a good chunk of the season, you were taking Tim Patrick, Richie James, and Josh Reynolds, and those guys don't fucking matter. So get some squads where if you hit on a bunch of guys, you've got more guys that matter than a bunch of, 80 to 85% of the tournament has. So yeah, so question for you, when you're talking about rookie edge, what are you trying to identify early? Or are you trying to identify like simply archetypes of guys, or are you going more of like who's likelier to get better draft capital and matter? Or are you doing a combo of both? Like what are you specifically looking for to bring into your draft rooms from that perspective?
I think it's a little bit of both, but I think it's more like archetype of like types of guys that are like more likely to hit in that big way. Because I mean, I think in really the thing is like you said, like realizing your edge and just in the first week or whatever, when I'm drafting those teams after the draft, when BBM opens, like if I'm at 100% some guy because he's in the 18th round and I just think this is a blatant misprice, like just hammering it because it'll balance out over the season. And I feel like when we're drafting, like we're doing big boards and whatever, like we get so tied to ADP, even when it's like, we know it's going to change. So I think just not giving a fuck about like, oh, I'm not going to like posting the screenshot and it looks weird because I have 100% of this guy that no one knows about. Like just, digging deep and then just taking real advantage that first week. And I think, cause I think like whatever, Pat last year was drafting like a shit ton of AR because he in like the 17th to 18th round when everything started, and obviously it didn't hit because he got hurt, but like that would if he would have stayed healthy, that would have been huge, like absolutely massive. I'm sure that would have been a big thing. So just really leaning into that. And
okay, no, that makes sense. I was curious. Oh well, and so this is an interesting thing. You mentioned this, and it was something I was thinking through. Is like, one thing that's fucked up with the barbell is you may lose, because I think and Liam and Pat and Pete have all talked about this, like navigating the draft is a skill that we all, by doing so many during such a long period of time, we get really good at knowing who's who's likely to fall, who's been falling lately, who's likely to get pushed around. When the sharp crowd's here, they're going to usually take these guys. How am I going to react when those guys are gone and I come back? Versus when the casual crowd comes in, we know they're going to push up, the running backs and quarterbacks, and these guys, they're going to be like, fuck him, blah, blah, blah. So like knowing those ebbs and flows, but also knowing ADPs, because if you do barbell, you do a shit ton in May and you come back and do a shit ton in August. It's 2 months where there's going to be a lot of swings. And so one thing I've been thinking through is like, ADP is good to know. Pockets of the draft are good to know. Not getting tied to what those are to you and how you attack them is probably the hardest thing to do, but probably the best thing to do. Like, for instance, the wide receiver cliff was fake. It was actually the cliff was much sooner, and the guys in between were much worse than we thought. And then we weren't, and so it was an interesting way. It's like, if you took, for instance, if every time you took that section where it's like, if you don't get Bateman, Flowers, Sky, Tony, Michael Thomas,
Sutton,
you're fucked until around 10-12 when you're going to take shots on OBJ, Jacoby, blah, blah, blah. And so one thing I'm thinking through is like, well, I did successfully identify midway through the season, okay, I don't like the end of the cliff as much. Guys like Cortland Sutton were fine. They were fine. They were good for the price, whatever. I didn't get hurt by fading guys like Cortland. I didn't benefit from having a usable, 8 to 15 point game guy. But what if I decided, okay, I'm not taking those guys because I like it, and that's where the all the social construct jokes aside, the truth lies in between, right? Because ADP does matter. We know that value does matter. Fareed said that. He's like, I knew that when I'm living a little, I'm pushing this to the next guy, and if I'm wrong, I'm getting double axed and wrong.
100%.
And if I'm right, I'm double leveraging the right. So it's like leverage, it can fucking crush you and it can fucking vault you. Well, what if you're mindful of the ADP, but you attack it differently? Because like if every time you took the dust balls at the cliff edge, you were taking the Jacobys, the Nikos, the whatevers, or you were like, okay, it's just weird. It's like identify players that are like, it's hard. It's a hard practice, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around like doing it, where it's like ADP matters at times, but construction and player combos matter more. And so if you're confident, like let's say Zay Flowers was really the only guy that you wanted at that cliff, but he was also rookie on a good offense. So like that archetype, you're like, okay, fading this could really fucking bury me. Sure. And this has a historical rate of hitting really well. That's who I'm going to take. And outside of that, then you just got to identify who are the next play. Like that's where I'm like, how do I practice that? Is it better of taking like a Nico and a Jacoby in that spot? Was it better to where I usually did, which is I would wait and be aggressive on making sure I got those guys, whether or not it was 10 to 16, 6 spots of ADP, I'm going to get those guys as my 5th, as my 6th, knowing I like that profile better. What's more impactful? Because at the end of the day, you could also just go ahead and start being aggressive on like targeting the if you've identified a 20 sub-slot of dudes that matter or don't matter, that's where it's like the pulse is good. ADP does matter, but it's not everything because I think where it fucks you is getting tied to ADP is you're taking a guy you don't like just because it's the value. But sometimes that's right? Like sometimes that was right. If for instance, Njoku falls 10 spots, you're like, I don't love Njoku with Watson because Watson and the Titans, which was right until he got hurt, and then he's getting fed by Flacco. So like chaos can make your point right or wrong. So sometimes it can get you on guys that matter, or you go like, fuck, Sky fell 10 picks. So it's gonna be weird to apply because there are times where it's like no one's exciting. Maybe that's I think as I talk, and maybe that's how to apply it. When
Yeah.
you get to a spot where you're like, nobody feels good, this just feels like this is how it is, and no one knows how we're doing it. Like, where are guys likely to rise to? And if they're, for instance, like Tank Dell rose like what 5 rounds
Yeah.
by the end of draft season. Well, okay, if he's rising into like the 13th, 12th round that
Why not just
easily,
take him?
maybe that's telling you this is a fake pocket, and just go target guys for your stacks, guys for your correlations, guys with better profiles. And maybe that's the lesson, is that the market is bad at pricing in certain spots with certain players because of projections, and we don't care about season-long projections. We care about weekly spikes. We care about stacking those things, and we care about trying to get those through. So that's
Especially later on, like you said, like once you
yeah,
hit like round 12, 13, like we talk about like it's kind of like a curve where it goes down. It's pretty flat after like round 12,
yeah.
13.
And I
So
think the only value there is like trying to get the combos right. So like if you could push, if you knew like knowing Jordan Love, that you're taking that guy right around Dak, right? Well, being able to get him, if and he did, he would drop 1 to 2 rounds below ADP. So it's like, is being aggressive on that guy better? In a vacuum, probably not. You'd probably take the discounted value unless you're mindfully taking him to then stack him, because that's the only
backdoor
way you
stack,
could do
yeah.
it. And that's where and so that's where I'm talking about, like that like compound lever is, if you're going to disrespect ADP, do it in a meaningful way.
Exactly. Don't just do it
Reaching
just for
5 rounds for your quarterback is probably vacuum bad unless you're going to go ahead and stack and correlate him. And the way to make sure you do that, it's again, it's just being mindful. It's fucking hard to do that whenever ADP value matters, especially that time of year where like the manifesto drops and you're like, ADP value
this is so
does
important.
matter.
Like this is
Marketing does matter to an extent. So yeah, yeah, it's a fun little puzzle in and of itself, because, um, you're one of 12 drafters in those
yeah.
rooms.
Sorry, this is a good point by Casey. He said the smart guys did a solid job with the late late rounds. It's those early middle guys. Yeah, I think like I mean this is a weird like very niche example, but like I know Lockett and JSN were kind of like and Deontay were all right there. Like between that, like whatever 5th round and like 8th round, like if you want to get if there's some guy that you really like and you want to whatever get some week 17 correlation, or you think it's a rookie that's going to rise up, and you can get like a unique combination. I think whatever, like those middle rounds, I think are a good place to do it, as opposed to, because like early, we don't really want to do it too much. Like you can, but I don't think it's probably not the best move. But those like middle, like 5 through 10, if you just whatever, I think it's usually wide receivers in that range, anyways. So like realistically, like instead of Jahan Dotson, if you would have taken whatever someone who's going in the 7th round or something, um,
No,
just
that's
to
a good
switch.
point. There's probably a time during the draft season to really be aggressive with that. I mean, hell, anecdotally, I think back to like Pete's streams, and in like May, we JGFC became a meme because he's taken, the year prior too, like early on, he would do this. He put this in action, but it can really fuck you if you're doing it early in the draft and early in the draft season, because the lack of information becomes a
Sure.
way bigger risk that can chop your fucking shit in
At that
half.
particular time, yeah.
Versus, yeah, I think with more information, I think becomes more confidence in making those moves, because you've reduced some of the risk, you've reduced some of the
Uncertain.
downside,
Yeah.
and you've, while also increasing the upside because of that added information. So yeah, that's a good point. Like as training camp's getting through, as rookies are getting reps, as we hear things, and sifting noise through signal is a skill and an art and random in and of itself. But applying those things in a meaningful manner, in a swift way, because sometimes those times to attack come and go. Like when there's whispers that Cup's hurt and might miss some time, and then that's when we start hearing all the Puka shit. Well, fuck. That was probably a time to, no matter what, be aggressive in making the move for that, because in that moment you've got that information, and in that moment you know that if that stays true and sticks, and it also has some of that historical, like, youth, we don't know, like, chaos power upside late in the season, where you had, because that same time Puka rose by like 3 rounds, but Stafford wouldn't move / barely get drafted
No,
consistently.
he
So
was
it was
in
like that was your time
13th
to
round,
attack.
14th round, yeah.
Yeah. So
I think you already kind of mentioned this, where based on injuries, but I think this is another thing that I just wanted to say as like my resolution is just, yeah, be more, I don't want to say player takey, but just like have full fades on guys. Like I think, like we said, like it really matters more about the hits than the misses. And if we can identify the guys where they don't really have that like big upside, like I think Pat, or who's the other guy, someone said like Adam Thielen is the price we pay for not taking those like dusty old guys. Like you'll live with
that was buying for.
yeah, you'll live with a couple of those, but I just think overall, like, uh, eliminate, like, I think they say there's another saying where it's like, whatever, like, it's not so much about what you're doing, but what you're not doing. Like, eliminating the bad habits out of your life, it can be more impactful than necessarily adding things in. And I think eliminating some players where you're just like, I'm only taking them because of ADP, and I'm only taking them because they have projectable volume, especially in the later rounds where it's just like, what are you really getting when this Van Jefferson hits? Like you said before, like I think that's a big thing for me, where being comfortable just missing out on this. Like, what are they going to give you? Like a few spike weeks, maybe, as opposed to like Jaden Reed, Marvin Mims didn't hit, but like Marvin Mims, realistically, like in the first couple weeks, he was going crazy, and then they just stopped using him. But like all those guys are way more impactful. We saw Jaden Reed, but there's a ton of examples of those kind of guys where it's just like, why are we taking these mid-ass guys just to take?
A great example, even fucking Trey Palmer for Tampa Bay had several spike weeks. I think at least 2 games of 2 touchdowns.
Trey Tucker
as well. So it's like, fuck, dude, if you just took those shots instead of the fucking dusty assholes at the end of the round, that shit matters. And how likely are those on rosters and making moves? And but yeah, I think if you're not compounding that in a meaningful way, you miss out on a good chunk of the upside, but you also open yourself up to the downside. And I think what I took away from the Winner Circle stream last night, I thought that was really important in my head, is I don't play on DraftKings because I just don't enjoy it, and I'm not going to spend hours not enjoying myself. I don't care. And well, I say that and I'm on Twitter all day, but but on Underdog, there's so rarely the guy you had to have, because you can make it up, because there's no random bonuses. It's half PPR. So like outside of, fuck, Kyron had 3 touchdowns and was still outscored by Breece Hall and was still nearly matched by Jerome Ford in 3 quarters of football. Yeah. And James Conner. So it's like, if we can't truly be buried by one guy, the odds are just super low on that. Like Lamar had the fucking game we've been waiting for, and Jordan Love did enough at cost with other pieces to like. So it's like, if we believe in the power of stacking and correlation, we should be more comfortable with full fades on low likelihood players, knowing that they can have like George Pickens had 2 big weeks in the playoffs. You didn't need him to win, but he helped.
Absolutely.
Somewhat because of his cost, somewhat because of his low ownership, because he underachieved. But it's like, that's not a bad thing. dude, when you have huge fucking dogs and they just open a door, it's a terrifying
I was
future.
gonna say, it looks. Is there a fucking ghost back there?
Well, he's full white, so yeah. But there he is. Hi, Bob. So it's
Oh,
like,
this is the content we need.
yeah. So it's like that's one thing I'm thinking through is, if I'm comfortable full fading it, I should probably be comfortable doing that in a few other spots because the likelihood of getting buried when it matters is low if you build mindfully in other spots. And so, yeah, you shouldn't be afraid to full fade a handful of guys, maybe even more than a handful of guys, because it is replaceable if you're acting accordingly. If you're taking fucking dust balls that you like and fading dust balls you don't like, well, then you can get buried. But yeah, but if you're letting everybody else take these dusty, projectable volume bets, but you're taking the high upside rookies that no one is taking, then you're printing, whatever, or you're taking shots on the RB2s a little bit earlier. There's ways to unlock that upside that I don't think we tap into enough.
Yeah.
And I think it's so much more fucking important because it's so much fucking harder to win, especially on underdog. You got a sharp crowd. You have a lot of good tools, a lot of good rankings, a lot of good people in the space with affordable or free information. And the payout structures, while they might get a little bit better next year, 3 years in a row, they've been kind of brutal across most of the tournaments. So if we're going in knowing all that, then you have to be more aggressive, but you have to be aggressive in like a really smart way.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it gets hard to do that. But yeah, I thought that was my takeaway from last night was
100%.
on underdog and maybe even drafters. Like my best drafters team at one point last weekend was in the top 50. And I didn't have CMC, I didn't have Brees, I didn't have Amari. And while I only finished in 98th, injuries and shit runs its way, but like there are ways to attack on non-DraftKings bonus type of platforms if you're building smart and you're attacking archetypes and you're not blindly cutting it off. And I think that's when you're talking about like grinding dynasty, and you and Spags, like, and Spags does this too, like there's a real edge in like the rookies and sophomores and attacking the rookies early in drafts. There's certainly an edge. But I also find that like the dynasty virgin mindset can block off like, well, he didn't have a good profile and he didn't have good draft capital, so I'm definitely not taking him in these fantasy drafts. And it's like, okay, what if we're wrong? What if our prism is so fucking wrong and you get to adjust in dynasty in season because you can immediately go game one, oh fuck, Puka isn't nothing.
Exactly.
I'm gonna go trade him for a
high,
second round
you
pick. You can make that adjustment. You can't make that adjustment in BestBall. So I think that's one area where like the dynasty brain can help and hurt, and I think it just depends on biases.
Absolutely.
But I think drafting with a little bit of humility is something I do not do well, but it's probably certainly an edge to push, just because I have a take, I have information, I can look up I can pull the Liam, and I did it plenty. If I don't know a guy, I look up his RAS, I look up his player profile, thing, and I decide whether or not that's worthwhile. And then I forget there are guys like Keenan and Devontae who were middling to meh, and the edge was simply going, well, what if he had? And that's where I started grinding. The summer was looking into poor combine performances or poor college performances, and looking for the rationale of why not. And if this guy was kind of hurt, kind of injured, or in Puka's case, was being played as like a tight end more often than a wide receiver because the wide receivers are all hurt, blah, 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 blah. Well, that tells me there's a potential edge to unlock because maybe this guy's profile is worse because of circumstances outside of his help. And there's uncertainty in how far higher that can take us if we attack that edge. And it's just easy to not do that because there's so many players and so much information. But yeah.
Do you have any other? I think we have about 10 minutes left before I have to hop off. Do you have any other overarching things you want to talk about? Anything else you want to hit before we wrap up?
Referencing last night's Winner's Circle stream again. Respect to Sean, who's both won $1 million twice and $75K in the puppy.
Yeah,
But I highly disagree that phone drafting is doing a disservice to yourself. I think there's a lot of utility in moving around because it starts getting the juices flowing.
I agree.
You're thinking in your back head. You're actually getting some fucking exercise. It's good for your fucking brain, your mentals, and every once in a while, it makes you see things in a different way. So I don't necessarily agree that phone drafting is suboptimal. Sure, there's not as much information on your computer readily available. Of course, KZ. But you know what does? Put that motherfucking information on paper. Make it fucking actionable. Fucking memorize that shit. If you can memorize the whole goddamn week 17 schedule, you can also go in, adjust your rankings with guys that are lower performing and blah, 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 blah. Like, you can dump all that information on paper, memorize it in a macro way, and then go fucking let your brain go crazy. You need to imagine some chaos.
I was
You
going to say
need,
us ADHDers do best when we're
yeah.
thrown into the fire. So that like maybe having less like information in front of you, or not less information, but just like being on the move and just
Analysis
like
paralysis is a thing, and every once
exactly
in a
thinking on the
while,
fly.
you need to be able to like dream up some wild concocting shit. You need to let your brain think about coaching staffs that are likely to be fucking donkeys and do donkey shit. Perfect example. Rob Coakley's prophecy of Devontae Adams looked pretty fucking on par until they axed Josh McDaniels. And then that prophecy was dead because they're trying really hard and they're going to like fucking go the distance. Okay, so maybe we need to be more mindful of like who's on the hot seat. And if the hot seat's getting hot, who's likely to make, who's likely to get axed, and then we're back to square one and all that shit. Brand Staley, like all that shit. Like there are macro things that matter to think through that make minute edges. But if you're not dreaming it and you're not thinking it, and you're instead drafting on one screen, on Twitter the other screen, you're stuck in an echo chamber that you can't escape, man. And you got to get out. And you got to sniff grass. You got to see sunlight, and you got to fucking dream, brother.
Hell yeah, brother. Last thing I want to say is I was thinking about this when you were talking a second ago, was like, I think last year Mathology was talking about how he really wanted to target like the good offenses, and you're obviously going to have misses. Like the Chiefs were kind of ass, the Chargers, obviously everyone got hurt. I think that's a good strategy, but I think pivoting off of that, like on bad offense, or what we think are going to be bad offenses, lean into the variance a little bit, because like, let's say like Bryce Young and CJ Stroud, right? Those are two quarterbacks that were going like 16th, 17th, 18th round.
Stroud went undrafted plenty of times, middle through the drafting season.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, obviously, whatever, one of them didn't work out, but those are spots where you can lean into the uncertainty, and the cost is so low where like you're not really losing much if it doesn't pay off. And I think like those are situations where like I think it's more important early on to target those good offenses. But then later on, like if there are some stacks you can get where you're just like, okay, we don't really know, but there's some sort of, either it's a new coach, some young rookies, that whatever, like you don't really know where it's going to go, but you can see the upside there. It goes along with what we were talking about earlier, but I think just, only drafting the good teams, it can get you some Gerald Everett's, it can get you some like weird player, Irv Smith, where like you're drafting them and it's like they can pay off, but I feel like it's really just I think it could be a fragile bet later on in the draft.
No, Irv Smith was never going to pay off. I said that like 7 months ago. I feel even more strongly about that now. But yes, I agree with your larger point that, but I think that goes back to an earlier point we made about you can make bets on good offenses, but be mindful of how you're making that bet. I think we're probably far gone from the days you could onslaught the Tom Brady first year Bucks with the last good year Aaron Rodgers Green Bay Packers and have a juggernaut of a team. I think we're at the point now where you're probably not triple stacking as often. And that's one thing I'm thinking about is like, how do I skinny stack? How do I double stack more mindfully, but also I think just being mindful of how much exposure you're getting to a team is probably the right way. And if you have to dream of a way for a player to matter, maybe the team's chances of being really good are thinner than we think. Like, and also coordinator changes matter. Brian Johnson taking over in Philly has been disastrous for their consistency and their upside outside of Jalen Hurts, pretty much. And I had concerns about that, but I didn't draft accordingly as often as I would have liked. Versus
Trust your gut.
Arizona ended up being a little bit better with a better coaching staff relative to cost, and those are other things to like take into consideration. But I agree that there's a lot more chaos with who is good versus who is bad, and maybe at the end of the day, lean on youth, because if injuries are going to happen throughout the course of the season, a team with more youth is likely to keep things afloat versus older teams.
Well, there's just more uncertainty there,
Yeah,
right? Like they could be good, like whereas
yeah,
like some teams where it's kind of more like they're cheap, but you more know what you're getting, like the Mac Jones and Hunter Henry stacks and whatever.
yeah,
Like there's not as much upside there.
yeah.
Um, so we got to wrap up soon and head out to an appointment. But I just wanted to say I'm going to be trying as hard as I can. I might have to, obviously, life hits you, but I'm going to try to do 3 times a week. So Mondays at 9 a.m. That'll be solo show with just me. Then Wednesdays we have my friend, the L coach, who was the guy who finished 15th in BBM, who we play a lot of Dynasty together. We're going to be doing those every Wednesday. And then Fridays, it's a variable schedule, obviously, whenever works for everyone, but I'm going to try to get some smart people on. I already have had a lot of people say they're going to come on. Pete said he would come on later in the season. I've had a couple other people agree to come on. So it'll be a mix of Dynasty and Best Ball. Like I said, I think that's one of the edges that I do have. So if I can help share that and get you guys into that, that would be great as well. But Emo Cowboy, thank you so much for hopping on. I always enjoy talking to you, and just be good, brother. I appreciate all your time.
Oh, appreciate you, man. Have a good one, and good luck with the new streaming schedule, Ben. Crush it.
Thank you, sir. Well, happy Friday and happy New Year, and have a great one, guys.